Whoa, we're back with some Bleach Soul Resonance, and I want to talk about this. We're gonna package this sort of in with other content because I don't want to just make it about this and my expectations, just so that we have a little more full of a video, right? But we have Bleach Soul Resonance account saying a more updated and accurate translation of this, which they said that, you know, initially it was that, and I don't think this post is available anymore, but I guess you can see it here. Initially it was that we're getting true Shikai Ichigo. That then changed, because I think that was just sort of like the hype. A more accurate translation of this would include Jushido and Shunsui in the discussion. While I don't think either of the captains will happen, please keep in mind they generalized Dual-Wielder rather than Dual-Wielder Ichigo. I think it goes Ichigo, Jushido, Shunsui in terms of likeliness. By the way, and I don't like, you know, not to step on this either, but we could also see Stark. Stark is a dual wielder. There actually are a few dual wielders in Bleach, but let's just say for now, it's, you know, Shikai, Ichigo, Jushido, or Yukitake, and Shunsui, and we'll just talk about that because I actually had a post here. Actually, I'm gonna go bring that up. So I had the initial post here, which was responding to the first one I saw, which was essentially that true Shikai Ichigo would be like a slash DPS. And I was just, you know, joking, BSR making him thrust into ailment lead to keep Majority #1. And the reason I kind of looked at that as like a possibility is because we do have a few characters sort of lined up in the immediate, right? So not to, you know, belabor this point, which we've gone over before, but right now, and I should actually go into one of the team sections here. So let's just go over here. So right now, this is what the game of Bleach Soul Resonance looks like. We need an SSR support. Reminder that I now have every single limited SSR after the selector. I was able to get Bankai Ichigo, right? So I have every limited SSR. So these are the teams currently. I would say these are the best versions of every team, and I'm not counting like, I don't know, like doing it for an event that takes certain characters. So like you could say like this, right? But I would say that in most cases, you still want to do something like this so that you can save your Mayuri for Joe's team, right? So this is probably the best version of the team you run with. This is the best version of this team that you run with. We go here. Obviously, the best version of this team would be something like this. Or if you had to use Mayuri on Joe's team, you could split the difference and run something like this. I'm currently just keeping her like this because Thrust has the best synergy. So it is easy to run something like Rangiku and still get a lot of value out of her. And then, last but not least, this is probably the best version of this team with like an Aizen main DPS. If you happen to have Dupes and Aizen, but otherwise you can obviously just run Toshido, right? And as we start to go through here, then we see that this team is complete. This team is complete in this way. And then that leaves these two teams to pick up the pieces. So we have a limited SSR that is not currently available, which is going to be our Yorahara replacement. And we have a limited SSR that is not currently replaceable, which is going to be our Mayuri replacement. It is a wild thing to imagine a Mayuri replacement at this point. So those are first on the list, not in their mind, but in our mind. That's sort of what we're looking for as players, is 2 supports. That said, coming off of an Okieta release, which will look something like, you know, this, right? We are faced with like, well, what does the game become if they decide to sort of like release these supports, right? I don't know if the game wants to release multiple supports. I'll sort of say it all the time, but in the grand scheme of things, the characters that sell the best are usually going to be DPS characters. Even though supports are the best in totality in gacha games, typically, these are the best characters. These are the most interesting characters. Even that goes down to sub DPS characters. These tend to be the, you know, flagship characters for a team. The DPS is just outrank typically. That's why we see combination characters like Ichigo, Kurosaki, in our Hollow have such glow-ups, and we see characters like Aizen, for example. I mean, we've got free-to-plays. We have free-to-plays out there who have pulled on every single version of Aizen that has come out, like in terms of like reruns. And that's not by like mistake, right? That's not manufactured. part of it does have to do with the fact that he is Aizen, obviously, but the other part is that you can turn your Aizen, who is more of a support, into a DPS, and it's like, yeah, well, that's what people want. You have the same thing that happened here with Nellel, who, by and large, is a supportive character, but she just does such, like, she is essentially the main actual, like, DPS of the thrust team, due to her sort of being the most on-field character, especially as you put Dupes in her. It's not that Gin doesn't do damage or anything, it's just that he almost plays like the supportive role on his own team, due to Impale being something that just sort of triggers, you know, on like while he plays the back, right? He's sort of just applying his Impale damage to Nellel's total damage. I hope that makes sense. So with that in mind, I could see it being true Shikai Ichigo, certainly. It would be odd to sort of go through this, you know, extensive buffing and fixing of like Kenpachi, and fixing of Ichigo, and adding all of his stuff to Hollow Ichigo, just to end up having a true Shikai Ichigo just knock them off immediately. In that respect, I way more expect Gin to get replaced, which is why I made the joke, like, what happens when true Ichigo shows up and he's actually just a thrust character? Because I think Gin is the most on the chopping block character in the game, almost, because Toshido is about to be. Toshido's gonna get knocked off. Like, it just is what it is. So if they don't add another support after that, it just ends up being Gin to me. Them adding another slash DPS is pretty unlikely for me personally. But, I mean, obviously I could see it. It is Ichigo. Ultimately, it is the main character, and there's never going to be a point where it's like, oh, we're just not going to add the main character, right? Like, you don't really need many excuses. And in fact, I've said all the time, like, just add more Ichigos. People want to play Goku. People want to play their main character, right? Even if I'm not like, oh my god, I love every version of Ichigo. Like, I think this version of Ichigo, where he's like drippy as hell, is sick. Baki Ichigo's pretty cool as well. But true Shikai Ichigo would be where, like, I'm starting to get like, ooh, I'm interested, right? So it becomes like a question of like when and why are we getting these things. Now, obviously, slash tactics is completely nil. I just, you know, we're done now. Now that we've had this confirmed, we just know that Shunsui, if it is Shunsui, and I would in fact go as far as to say that I don't think it can be Shunsui, purely because we now have him knocked out of that position of slash tactic, and I expect him to be a slash tactics character if he does show up. So I don't think it really can be him. What we could get then is Yukitake, who I would personally expect to be either slash support, which I've talked about before, or a spirit support. The reason I'd say slash support, even though he's like a, you know, an elemental hucking monster, is because he is dual wielding. He is dual wielding 2 swords. I could see them leading into that quite a bit. Maybe he does like a bunch of slashes and like the swords sort of follow him with like elemental energy, or, you know, what have you. He's a support ultimately, so he doesn't really, he could be like Yodahara, because remember, Yodahara was a spirit character. People want to, like, you know, don't forget that Yodahara, until they decided to make him slash, was a spirit character. So they could just make Yukitake slash. This doesn't really deconfirm either my sensation that Rukia will show up sooner rather than later. What they could do is add a Rukia, TYBW Rukia, to replace Aizen, and then later on add a, you know, later on in that same like month period, like maybe the same 2 to 3 character period, add a true Shikai Ichigo, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. But it really does come down to where they want to layer this, but I don't know. True Shikai Ichigo, certainly I could see it. Certainly I could see him coming, but I'm still sort of the opinion that we might be getting a replacement for Aizen soon, as well as seeing maybe one of the captains take up a supportive role for someone like Hollow Ichigo. It is just one of those things though, where when you're talking about, okay, let's add a main character, like when you're, if you have a One Piece game or something, and someone says they're gonna add Luffy, and someone else goes, why would they add Luffy? We literally just got a this element character, or, you know, Luffy can only be a DPS. We just got like 3 DPSs. It's like, well, it's because it's Luffy. You know what I mean? It's like, it just is what it is. It's not that's not going to change for anyone. Like, if they want to add the main character, they're going to add him. So, a lot of yapping just to say that I do think that the other options are, for right now, I wouldn't say like it's like a 70%, 60 or 80% or anything like that. I would say that I'm closer to maybe it being like a 50-50 shot that we just get Yukitake as a support, but that's just me. After that, though, let's get into something else. Actually, I just want to pop in on this point one more like thing that is sort of interesting, which is this is still a gacha game. So if you Core 4 is coming, so the end of Bleach content, like essentially period, for a long time, unless they want to extend this into something special, unless they want to go a different way with the series, you know, sequels or light novels or what have you. This is probably going to be the last of Bleach for a very long time, sadly. And what a way to go out. So as a celebration, you've seen this with like with Dokkan, we might get a push-up of something like True Shikai Ichigo to coincide with the release. What that would mean is that you could hedge your bets, but I don't want to hear any complaining if he doesn't show up. But if just to like hedge our bets here, if you are someone who values a true Ichigo over like a white hollow Ichigo or something like that, I don't blame you, obviously, he's new. But you should be aware that this probably does mean skipping Ulquieta if you want dupes. And are you willing to do that? Because there is something to be made of sort of, you know, leaning or erring on the side of you know, conservatism in this case. Whereas, like, I think most people would be like, I want to pull for at least one of every copy of something. Because if they do add a TYBW character, they push up a TYBW character. And I do think they will push up a TYBW character in general, because essentially it's just a celebration, right? It is going to effectively be in celebration of a release of something. We could see him really gap the game as far as DPSs go, because this would count to me as another major celebration character. So thinking like an LL, thinking like a Grimjo, thinking like a Ichigo, thinking like in some time going to be an Ulquieta. So I would, at the very least, I would consider pulling back a little bit if you were planning to dupe characters as a free-to-play or low-spending character. That would be my last advice, is that if you were planning to, like, okay, I'm going to just throw all of my Jade away no matter what, I would hold back a little bit. And that is just to say that it is valuable to have something in reserve in case we do get that true Shikai Ichigo. I do think that is a valuable place to be at. But okay, now let's talk about like something else. So this is the final thing I actually want to talk about. There's gonna be a little bit of a tip thing. So does anyone say it? She gets 50% crit rate. Okay, so we do talk about Yoruichi. So I agree, Yoruichi is the best one to get here if you're strictly trying to like dump a bunch of material into something. However, I have a different perspective on this. Are any of the other standard weapon stamps actually worth getting? Let's go over here. So, I believe that the only reason we are now pulling for the standard banner stamps, outside of a major buff being given to standard characters, is to dust them. So, what am I saying? I have a level 5 Hakuda and Kido weapon stamp, right? If I were to go into weapon stamps, once we have an overcap of them, and I'm gonna, like I said, I'll continue to test this, but for now, save your standard tickets. Let's see. Oh, wait, I can do it now. Okay, it just doesn't filter. Why doesn't it filter? That's so weird. That's so very odd. Okay, so this is essentially what I'm going to be doing with my Yoruichi stamp eventually. Now, this will make my Yoruichi much worse at some point. I'm not going to do it now, but that is going to be my plan. That is my plan as it stands. So we have an entire Yoruichi stamp, standard stamp, to tick away the moment we want it. And I would suggest this as an alternative because it is a free-to-play way to acquire power for your limited SSRs. Because and you could be like, well, why would I do that? You know, why wouldn't I just, you know, I don't know. Why would I do that? Because then I waste my Yoruichi. This guy's like weapon stamp is this guy's weapon stamp is the majority of his damage. So if you're a big Kenpachi fan, getting extra points into this weapon stamp is actually how you make your Kenpachi better. It's not other things. Like it goes from so increases the damage of dealt by technique by 50%, and then you get an additional 20%. If you go up to, you get 25% and 62%, right? This right here is the damage. This right here is the damage. So I don't know if you're someone who really likes a character. I mean, here's another one. You could get 25% crit rate, or you could go up to like 50% crit rate with enough, as well as entire team crit damage, right? Like this would make it so that you could put a crit damage piece on your Hollow Ichigo instead of a second gear, like a crit rate gear piece too, right? Like these are sort of the decisions you could end up making. Maybe you love Gin. Remember that Gin's weapon stamp actually goes up a ton, because right now it's 15%, but it goes up to 30%, right? Or it should, because they double the numbers, which is a massive amount for Gin, because he is not someone who gets an even amount. So that would be 60% in total or something, right? It would put him at like 100% crit rate pretty comfortably. So that is probably my plan. I did want to explain that. Sorry it was a little fumbly because I could not, I thought it would let me filter, but it really didn't, which is very surprising for me. But that will be what I do. I did spend a few stamps worth grabbing, like, for example, Byakuya stamp, right? I've gotten Komomura stamp. I've gotten, I didn't get this guy's stamp, funnily enough. I got Tozen stamp, like, those might be on the chopping block sometime soon as well. It'll depend on if we see actual buffs for any of these standard characters. I'm not going to wax them that fast, but I do, once I get my 6 weapon stamp of Yoruichi, I'm going to give her that 6 stamp, and I'm going to dust her 5 stamps. And I'm just going to continue to do that over and over again to build a backlog of weapon dupes. Because weapon dupes are extremely powerful, especially, and while a weapon dupe like this is very powerful, like we could see, you know, this would go up to like 50%, so on and so forth. I think the reason the weapon dupes are extremely powerful are particularly on the DPSs. The DPSs really want their weapon stamps to be like duped, right? I mean, you get like, what would this be? This would go up to like 45%. This would be a like 0.1, or this would be 1.4%, right? And this would be 30% extra damage on the ultimate or something like huge amounts, because this stacks. This stacks. So it's like a 10% strike resistance debuff or something like that. This is a really powerful weapon stamp, and I would say this is comparable to getting free dupes into characters in some instances. This is comparable to literally pouring free dupes into characters, because in the case of Kenpachi, if you were to right now say pull for B4, if you were to right now say like, oh sorry, if you were to right now say pull for B4, or as like a free-to-play person, so you're like a B1 or B2 and you have to get B3 then B4, or grab weapon dupes, I would say grab weapon dupes. I really would. I would really say grab weapon dupes. So there is a little tip for people wondering what to do with their standard weapon gacha tickets. I actually think right now, as it stands, the weapon banner here is the vastly more valuable banner. The standard banner essentially has no value at all, but the more of these we get, the more valuable that this banner becomes. So that's just me. Maybe someone would have a different perspective on that, but I do think this is the way to go. But I've been Lone. Like and like the video, subscribe to the club, we'll go make it, and peace.